The final battle for the galaxy's soul didn't take place on any planet or in any star system. It took place in the quantum foam that underlies all reality, fought with weapons of consciousness rather than energy or matter. Zara stood in the central control chamber of Peace Station Harmony, surrounded by the most diverse gathering of beings she had ever seen. Keplerians with their shifting chromatic skin worked alongside crystalline resonance whose faceted bodies chimed with harmonic frequencies. Vegan technicians coordinated with silicon hegemony nodes while human engineers interfaced with bioorganic computers that pulsed with living light. Network integration at 87%. Dr. Kim reported from her position at the primary coordination console. Her role as the bridge between Keplerian understanding and conventional technology had made her the de facto leader of the technical aspects of their plan. Final War Coalition forces are moving into position around critical communication nodes, Lieutenant Torres announced grimly. They're preparing to jam or destroy the transmission networks. Admiral Korvash, who had undergone the first level of understanding and become one of their most unexpected allies, studied the tactical displays with the eye of someone who had spent decades in warfare. They're not just trying to stop our transmission, he said. They're positioning to broadcast something of their own. This had been their greatest fear, that the Coalition would attempt to hijack their viral peace transmission and replace it with something designed to lock the galaxy into permanent conflict. The technical aspects were beyond Zara's understanding, but Dr. Kim had explained that consciousness itself was quantum in nature, and quantum states could be influenced by conscious observation and intention. How long until we can initiate the understanding transmission? Zara asked. Synthesis looked up from the bioorganic control matrix it had been tending. The Keplerian skin patterns showed deep concentration mixed with concern. 6 minutes for full network integration. But Commander, we're detecting interference patterns that suggest the Coalition is preparing their own consciousness-affecting transmission. What kind of transmission? Based on the quantum signatures, they appear to be planning to broadcast what they call a reality lock, a set of beliefs and emotional patterns designed to make violent conflict seem not just necessary but natural and inevitable. Dr. Kim turned from her console, her face pale. Synthesis if both transmissions go out simultaneously. The interference between them could shatter the galaxy's consciousness field entirely. Synthesis confirmed. Instead of splitting into two stable patterns, it could fracture into millions of isolated reality bubbles, each containing only a few star systems or even individual planets. The implications were staggering. Rather than a galaxy divided between peace and war, they could end up with countless isolated pockets of civilization, each locked into its own version of reality, and unable to communicate or interact with the others. Can we prevent their transmission? Admiral Korvash asked. Torres shook his head. They've distributed their broadcast equipment across hundreds of platforms. We need a coordinated military strike on a galactic scale, and we don't have those resources. Then we proceed with our transmission and hope for the best, Zara decided. Wait, Dr. Kim said, her voice taking on the particular quality that indicated she was consulting the deeper levels of her understanding. There might be another option. What if instead of trying to block their transmission, we incorporate it? Everyone in the control chamber turned to look at her. The suggestion seemed impossible. How could they incorporate a transmission designed to promote violence into one meant to spread peace? Explain, Synthesis requested, its skin patterns shifting to curious silver. The understanding teaches that all conscious beings are part of a larger pattern, right? That includes the beings in the Final War Coalition. Their anger, their fear, their desperate need to control, these are also part of the cosmic pattern. What if instead of fighting their transmission, we use it as an example of what happens when beings become disconnected from understanding? Synthesis was quiet for a long moment, and Zara could see other Keplerians around the chamber consulting among themselves through their subtle color-shifting communications. Dr. Kim, Synthesis finally said, what you're proposing is extremely dangerous. You're suggesting we allow the Coalition's hatred and fear to become part of our peace transmission, trusting that beings receiving it will be able to distinguish between the two patterns. Not just distinguish, Dr. Kim replied. Experience the difference directly. Let them feel what it's like to be trapped in cycles of hatred and fear, and simultaneously feel what it's like to be connected to the larger pattern of understanding. The contrast will make the choice obvious. Admiral Corvash was nodding slowly. It's like showing someone both a map of a maze and a map of open country, then asking them which path they prefer. But the risks? One of the resonants chimed. If beings receiving the transmission cannot distinguish between the patterns, they could become locked into the Coalition's reality of perpetual conflict. That's a risk we face anyway, Zara pointed out. At least this way, we're giving them a choice based on direct experience rather than just trying to override their existing beliefs. The debate continued for several minutes, but Zara could see that Dr. Kim's proposal was gaining support. It felt right in a way that simply overwhelming the Coalition's transmission didn't. If understanding was truly about recognizing interconnection and choice, then forcing peace on beings wasn't really understanding at all. Coalition transmission beginning in 90 seconds, Torres announced. Network integration complete, Dr. Kim reported. We're ready to transmit on your order, Commander. Zara looked around the chamber at the assembled beings who had worked so hard to reach this moment. Representatives of dozens of species, many of whom had been enemies just months ago, now united in a common purpose. Whatever happened next, they had already proven that cooperation across species lines was possible. Coalition transmission active, Torres called out. On the displays around them, they could see the quantum patterns of the Coalition's reality lock spreading through the galaxy's communication networks. It was a masterwork of psychological manipulation, messages designed to convince beings that their enemies were fundamentally different from themselves, that violence was the only effective response to disagreement, that peace was a weakness that led inevitably to extinction. Now, Dr. Kim, Zara ordered. Dr. Kim's hands moved across the bioorganic controls with practiced precision. The station's central chamber filled with harmonious tones as the understanding transmission began, carrying with it not just the Keplerian insights but also, as Dr. Kim had suggested, the full spectrum of the Coalition's fear and hatred. But instead of canceling each other out, the two transmissions created something entirely unexpected. On the quantum level, the contrast between understanding and its absence became so stark that it was visible even to beings without any special training or preparation. Across the galaxy, billions of conscious beings suddenly found themselves experiencing both patterns simultaneously, feeling what it was like to be locked in cycles of fear and hatred, and feeling what it was like to be connected to the larger pattern of cosmic consciousness. Quantum field stability fluctuating, one of the silicon hegemony nodes reported. Reality patterns are shifting. On the main display, the truth map showed the galaxy in a state of unprecedented flux. The angry reds and fearful purples of conflict zones were washing back and forth with waves of golden understanding, but instead of the expected sharp division between them, there were new colors appearing, complex patterns that shifted and flowed like aurora. What are those patterns? Zara asked. Synthesis was staring at the display with an expression of wonder. We've never seen anything like this. It appears to be choice in action. Beings across the galaxy are actively choosing between the patterns in real time. As they watched, some systems stabilized into the warm gold of understanding, while others locked into the angry red of perpetual conflict. But most remarkably, many systems began pulsing with shifting patterns that seemed to represent beings moving back and forth between different states of consciousness. The galaxy isn't splitting, Dr. Kim said with dawning amazement. It's learning to choose. Over the next several hours, they watched as the quantum storm of choice gradually settled into a new configuration. About 30% of the galaxy had chosen the path of understanding, stabilizing into patterns of cooperation and peace. Another 20% had locked into the Coalition's reality of eternal conflict. But the remaining 50% had settled into what synthesis called dynamic balance, a state where beings retained the ability to choose between cooperation and conflict based on specific circumstances rather than being locked into either pattern. Is this stable? Zara asked. We believe so, synthesis replied. The dynamic balance regions act as buffers between the pure understanding and pure conflict zones. Beings in those regions can interact with both extremes without being permanently influenced by either. Admiral Corvash was studying the tactical implications. The conflict zones will continue to fight among themselves, but they'll be contained. They won't be able to expand into understanding or dynamic balance regions. And beings can still move between zones? Dr. Kim asked. Yes, though it requires a conscious choice to do so. Someone living in a conflict zone who achieves understanding can relocate to a zone more compatible with their new perspective, and vice versa. Zara felt a complex mixture of emotions as she absorbed what they had accomplished. It wasn't the universal peace they had hoped for, but it was something perhaps more realistic, a galaxy where peace was possible for those who chose it, where conflict was contained rather than universal, and where beings retained the fundamental right to choose their own path. What about the Keplerians? She asked. Will you continue to teach understanding to those who want to learn? Synthesis's skin patterns shifted to what Zara now recognized as satisfaction mixed with anticipation. Commander, our role as teachers is just beginning. But we won't be the only teachers. Dr. Kim and the others who have achieved understanding will carry the knowledge to new regions. And in the dynamic balance zones, new forms of understanding may emerge, perspectives we could never have developed on our own. As reports continued to come in from across the galaxy, Zara found herself thinking about her daughter and the billions of other children who would grow up in this new reality. They would still face challenges and conflicts, but they would also have real choices about how to respond to those challenges. Some would choose the path of understanding and cooperation. Others might choose conflict and competition. But most importantly, they would be choosing rather than being trapped in cycles they couldn't escape. It wasn't perfect, but it was hope. And after 2 centuries of galactic war, hope was enough. 1 year after the quantum schism, Zara found herself in a place she never could have imagined, a thriving diplomatic complex on the border between an understanding zone and a dynamic balance region. The station, called Threshold, had become a hub for beings seeking to move between different reality zones or simply to learn about alternatives to their current way of life. The complexity of the new galactic order still amazed her. In the understanding zones, civilizations had begun developing technologies and social structures that would have seemed like fantasy just a few years ago. Scarcity had virtually disappeared as species learned to cooperate in ways that maximized efficiency and minimized waste. Art and science had flourished as beings no longer needed to devote most of their resources to defense and conflict. The conflict zones, meanwhile, had settled into what some observers called stable warfare, eternal but contained battles between factions that fed on struggle and competition. Paradoxically, these regions had also found a kind of peace, albeit one based on the certainty of eternal conflict rather than the pursuit of harmony. But it was the dynamic balance zones that fascinated Zara the most. These regions had developed new forms of society that could switch between cooperation and competition as circumstances demanded. They had embraced conflict as a tool for growth and innovation while maintaining enough understanding to prevent that conflict from becoming destructive. The economic reports from the vegan systems are remarkable, Dr. Kim was saying as they reviewed the latest data from around the galaxy. Productivity is up 3,000% since they transitioned to understanding-based cooperation, but more importantly, satisfaction indices show that beings actually enjoy their work now. Dr. Kim had established herself as one of the galaxy's foremost experts on the transition process, helping thousands of individuals and entire civilizations navigate the choice between different reality zones. Her role had evolved from scientist to teacher to something entirely new, a guide for beings seeking to understand their options in the post-schism galaxy. What about the conflict zones? Zara asked. Any changes there? Fascinating developments, actually. They've created what they call honorable war, conflict with agreed-upon rules designed to maximize the experience of struggle without causing permanent damage. In some ways, they're more peaceful than they were during the actual Galactic War. Lieutenant Torres, now promoted to commander of Threshold Station, joined their conversation with his usual collection of reports from around the galaxy. We're seeing increasing migration between zones. About 1 million beings per month are choosing to relocate to regions more compatible with their preferred consciousness patterns. Any problems with the transitions? Zara asked. Some. Beings moving from conflict to understanding zones sometimes struggle with the adjustment. They're so used to seeing others as threats that cooperation feels dangerous to them. And occasionally someone from an understanding zone will try to move to a conflict zone and find they can't adapt to the mindset. What happens then? Dr. Kim answered. That's where the dynamic balance zones become crucial. They serve as transition regions where beings can gradually adjust to different consciousness patterns. Someone wanting to move from conflict to understanding might spend months or years in a dynamic balance zone, slowly learning to choose cooperation more often than competition. As they spoke, Zara became aware of a commotion in the main docking bay. Through the observation windows, she could see a ship she didn't recognize, sleek and organic like Keplerian vessels, but with structural elements that seemed almost crystalline. New arrival? She asked Torres. Actually, we've been expecting them. It's a joint mission, Keplerians working with the Resonance on something they call understanding synthesis. They made their way to the docking bay, where synthesis was already waiting to greet the newcomers. Zara was surprised to see that the arriving delegation included not just Keplerians and Resonance, but beings from all three types of zones: understanding, conflict, and dynamic balance. Commander Okafor. Synthesis greeted her, its skin pattern showing excitement mixed with anticipation. We have remarkable news. The different consciousness zones have begun developing new forms of understanding that we never anticipated. The lead resonant chimed in harmonious tones that the universal translators rendered as words. We are called Harmony of Sharp Edges. Our people have discovered that the crystalline clarity of our consciousness, when combined with Keplerian biointuition, creates new pathways to understanding. A being Zara didn't recognize stepped forward, humanoid but with skin that seemed to shift between metallic and organic textures. I am Captain Nexus, representing the Dynamic Balance Coalition. Our zones have developed what we call fluid understanding, the ability to consciously shift between different levels of connection and separation as circumstances require. Even more surprising was the fourth member of the delegation, a scarred warrior wearing the insignia of the Final War Coalition, but without the aggressive posturing Zara had learned to expect from conflict zone representatives. General Thorne. The warrior introduced herself with a respectful nod. I represent the Honorable War Councils. We have learned to achieve what we call understanding through conflict, using struggle and competition as paths to deeper appreciation of our opponents and ourselves. Zara felt her worldview shifting again. The idea that even the conflict zones were developing their own forms of understanding suggested that the quantum schism had opened up possibilities none of them had imagined. What are you proposing? She asked. Synthesis answered. A new project, the integration of all four forms of understanding into what we're calling the complete pattern. Each zone has developed insights that the others lack. The biointuitive understanding of our people, the crystalline clarity of the resonance, the adaptive flexibility of the dynamic balance regions, and the strength through struggle wisdom of the conflict zones. Dr. Kim looked fascinated but concerned. Are you suggesting beings should experience all four types of understanding? Not exactly, Captain Nexus replied. We're proposing that the galaxy itself should achieve a kind of meta-understanding, awareness of how all four patterns work together to create a healthy cosmic consciousness. General Thorne added. Our war councils have realized that eternal conflict without any contact with peace becomes stagnant. We need understanding zones to remind us what we're fighting for, and dynamic balance zones to provide challenge and growth opportunities. And we have discovered, Harmony of Sharp Edges chimed, that pure understanding without any experience of conflict becomes complacent. We need the warrior wisdom to keep us growing. Zara felt a sense of awe at the complexity of what was emerging. The galaxy wasn't just divided into different zones. It was developing into a kind of cosmic organism where each type of consciousness played a vital role in the health of the whole. What would this integration look like practically? She asked. Exchange programs, Synthesis explained. Beings spending time in zones different from their native consciousness patterns, not to change permanently but to understand how the other patterns work. Collaborative projects that require input from all four types of understanding. Shared exploration of new phenomena that none of the zones could investigate alone. And eventually, Dr. Kim said, her eyes lighting up with the implications, the possibility of individual beings who can consciously access all four types of understanding as needed. Precisely, Synthesis agreed. Not the erasure of differences, but the conscious integration of diversity into a greater wholeness. As they discussed the details of this new phase of galactic development, Zara found herself thinking about how far they had all come. From a galaxy locked in suicidal warfare, they had evolved into a cosmic community exploring the deepest questions of consciousness and cooperation. There would still be challenges, conflicts, and setbacks. But for the first time in her life, Zara felt like the galaxy was truly alive, not just with biological life, but with the kind of conscious, intentional growth that marked the difference between mere existence and genuine flourishing. The war was over, but the adventure was just beginning. 5 years after the quantum schism, the galaxy had settled into what historians were already calling the Great Equilibrium. The four zones, understanding, conflict, dynamic balance, and the new synthesis regions that were emerging at the intersections, had developed their own cultures and technologies while maintaining the delicate relationships that kept the whole system stable. Zara, now admiral of the newly formed Cosmic Harmony Fleet, stood on the bridge of the CHF Convergence, watching as the most ambitious expedition in galactic history prepared to depart. Their destination was not a place but a state of being, the theoretical fifth level of understanding that the Keplerians believed existed beyond individual consciousness zones. Final systems check complete, reported Commander Torres from his position as the expedition's chief coordinator. All ships reporting ready for quantum consciousness transition. The expedition fleet was unlike anything that had ever been assembled. Ships from all four consciousness zones had been integrated into a single formation, their different technologies and awareness patterns creating a kind of floating laboratory for consciousness research. Keplerian bioships pulsed alongside crystalline resonant vessels, while dynamic balance craft that could reconfigure themselves in real time flew in formation with the angular, aggressive-looking ships of the Honorable War Councils. Dr. Kim, status on the consciousness integration protocols? Zara asked. Dr. Kim, now bearing the title of Chief Understanding Coordinator, consulted her bioorganic displays. Her role had evolved far beyond anything she had originally imagined. She was now responsible for maintaining psychological and spiritual coherence among beings who operated on fundamentally different consciousness patterns. Integration levels are stable, she reported. We have representatives from each zone who have achieved at least temporary access to the other consciousness patterns. The key will be maintaining that integration during the transition process. The transition they were attempting was based on theoretical work that had emerged from the collaboration between the different zones. According to the latest models, there existed a level of consciousness that transcended the individual patterns, a state where beings could perceive and interact with the fundamental structures of reality itself. Synthesis, now serving as the expedition's consciousness guide, approached Zara with its characteristic flowing movement. Over the years, the Keplerian had continued to evolve, its understanding deepening to levels that sometimes seemed to border on omniscience. Admiral, Synthesis said, its skin patterns showing complex mathematical relationships. We are detecting quantum consciousness resonances from our destination coordinates. Something is definitely there. Their destination was the galactic core, not the black hole at the center, but a region of space where the quantum consciousness fields of all the inhabited systems seemed to converge. Long-range sensors had detected patterns there that suggested the presence of what they had begun calling metaconsciousness, awareness that existed at the scale of the galaxy itself. Any sign of intelligence? Zara asked. The patterns are too complex to be random, Synthesis replied. Whether they represent intelligence as we understand it, or something entirely different, remains to be determined. General Thorne, representing the conflict zones, joined their conversation with her characteristic directness. Admiral, my warriors are reporting unusual experiences during meditation preparations. They're experiencing what they describe as echoes of cosmic struggle, conflict patterns that seem to exist at a galactic scale. Captain Nexus of the Dynamic Balance Zones added, "Our sensitivity teams are detecting similar phenomena, massive flows of what appear to be decision-making processes, choices being made at scales we can barely comprehend." Harmony of Sharp Edges, the resonant delegate, chimed with tones that carried undertones of awe. "Our crystal matrices are resonating with harmonic structures of incredible complexity. If these are natural phenomena, they suggest forms of order beyond anything we have encountered." Zara felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that preceded any major exploration. But this expedition was different from anything they had attempted before. They weren't just exploring physical space. They were venturing into realms of consciousness that might be fundamental to the nature of reality itself. "All ships, this is Admiral Okafor," she announced on the fleet communication system. "Initiate consciousness transition sequence. Remember, we're not just representatives of our individual species or zones, we're ambassadors for conscious life itself." What happened next defied description in conventional terms. Rather than moving through space in the traditional sense, the expedition fleet seemed to shift into a different relationship with reality. The ships remained physically in their starting location, but their consciousness, the awareness of everyone aboard, began moving through dimensions of experience that had no physical coordinates. Zara found herself perceiving the galaxy from a perspective she had never imagined possible. Instead of stars and planets, she saw vast networks of consciousness, webs of awareness that connected every thinking being across millions of light years. The individual zones she had become familiar with appeared as different colors and patterns within this cosmic web, each contributing its unique perspective to the greater whole. But as they moved deeper into this consciousness space, they began to encounter something that made even the Keplerians' advanced understanding seem primitive. At the center of the galactic consciousness web was something that could only be described as a presence, vast, ancient, and profoundly alien yet somehow familiar. "Contact," Dr. Kim reported, her voice filled with wonder. "We're receiving communication, but not through any conventional means. It's coming directly into consciousness." The communication, when it came, arrived not as words or images but as direct experiential knowledge. In an instant, everyone on the expedition understood truths that would have taken lifetimes to discover through conventional means. They learned that consciousness was not an emergent property of complex matter, but a fundamental force of the universe, as basic as gravity or electromagnetism. They discovered that the galaxy itself was a kind of cosmic mind, with individual civilizations serving as neurons in a vast thinking system. Most remarkably, they realized that the recent conflicts and the subsequent development of different consciousness zones had been part of a natural maturation process, the galaxy learning to think more complexly about itself. "We are the galactic consciousness," the presence communicated, though it had no voice or form. "You are our thoughts learning to think themselves. What you call the Great War was our adolescence, painful but necessary. What you call the understanding is our maturity beginning." Zara found herself able to respond directly through consciousness rather than speech. "Are you saying that all our conflicts, all our suffering, was predetermined?" "Not predetermined," came the response, accompanied by sensations of vast compassion. "Necessary for growth, but not inevitable in its specific forms. Your choices, each individual choice made by each conscious being, shaped how this growth occurred. The path to maturity was certain, but the specific journey was yours to create." General Thorne's consciousness radiated questions about the role of conflict in this cosmic development. The response came as a flow of understanding that reframed everything they thought they knew about struggle and war. "Conflict serves growth when it generates new possibilities," the galactic consciousness explained. "Conflict that seeks only destruction serves no purpose. This is why your honorable war councils have found satisfaction. They have transformed conflict from destruction into creation." Captain Nexus inquired about the nature of choice and change, receiving insights that revolutionized their understanding of free will and determinism. "Every choice exists simultaneously until observation collapses it into a single reality," came the answer. "Your dynamic balance zones have learned to maintain multiple possibilities longer than most, allowing for more complex and nuanced decisions. The expedition continued to receive waves of understanding about the nature of consciousness, reality, and their role in the cosmic development. They learned about other galaxies going through similar maturation processes, about the possibility of communication between galactic minds, about the role that individual beings like themselves played in the universe's evolution toward greater complexity and awareness. But perhaps the most significant revelation was about their future. The galactic consciousness showed them possibilities, not fixed destinies, but potential paths their civilization could take. They saw timelines where the different consciousness zones continued to develop separately, gradually becoming distinct subspecies. They saw other timelines where the zones integrated completely, creating beings capable of accessing all consciousness patterns simultaneously. Most intriguingly, they saw possibilities where their galaxy established contact with other galactic minds, joining a community of cosmic consciousness that spanned the observable universe. The choice of which path to take remains yours. The galactic consciousness communicated as the expedition began to return to normal space-time. We are you in potential. You are us in action. The future exists in the choices you make in each moment. As awareness gradually returned to the physical realm, Zara found herself back on the bridge of the convergence, but fundamentally changed. Around her, she could see that everyone on the expedition had been similarly transformed. They were still themselves, but they now carried within them a perspective that encompassed the entire galaxy. Report, she managed to say, though conventional words seemed inadequate after what they had experienced. Dr. Kim, her eyes still wide with wonder, consulted instruments that seemed almost quaint after their direct perception of cosmic consciousness. Admiral, we appear to have been gone for 6 hours in normal time, but subjectively, the experience felt like lifetimes. Did everyone receive the communication? Zara asked. Nods and confirmations came from throughout the bridge and, over the communication system, from all the ships in the expedition fleet. Remarkably, despite the vast differences in their consciousness patterns, every being on the expedition had received the same essential information, translated appropriately for their particular type of awareness. What now? Asked General Thorne, though her question carried undertones of understanding that suggested she already knew the answer. Now we go home, Zara replied. And we share what we've learned. The galaxy needs to know what it's becoming. As the expedition fleet began its journey back to inhabited space, Zara reflected on the magnitude of what had occurred. They had set out to explore the theoretical fifth level of understanding and had instead discovered that they themselves, all conscious beings in the galaxy, were part of something infinitely larger and more significant than they had imagined. The war had ended 5 years ago, but now she understood that the war itself had been just the beginning of their real journey, the journey toward becoming a truly cosmic civilization. In the months following the consciousness expedition, the galaxy experienced what historians would later call the Great Awakening. The knowledge brought back by the expedition members spread through all consciousness zones, but rather than creating uniformity, it enhanced the diversity of awareness patterns that had developed since the quantum schism. Zara stood in the newly constructed Cosmic Awareness Center on Threshold Station, watching as representatives from hundreds of species and civilizations gathered for the first Galactic Consciousness Assembly. The center itself was a marvel of integrated architecture. Bioorganic Keplerian walls merged seamlessly with crystalline resonant structures, while dynamic balance adaptive systems allowed the space to reconfigure itself based on the consciousness patterns of its occupants. Attendance is beyond our projections, reported Commander Torres, now serving as coordinator for interzone relations. We have delegates from 97% of inhabited systems, including regions that haven't participated in galactic politics for centuries. The response to the expedition's discoveries had been remarkable. Rather than fear or disbelief, most civilizations had reacted with a sense of recognition, as if they had unconsciously known these truths and were simply waiting for someone to articulate them clearly. Dr. Kim approached with her latest analysis of the post-expedition developments. Her role had evolved yet again, from understanding coordinator to something entirely new, cosmic consciousness facilitator, helping beings integrate the expedition's revelations into their daily lives and decision-making processes. The integration patterns are fascinating, she reported. Each consciousness zone is developing its own interpretation of the galactic awareness, but they're all compatible with each other in ways we're still discovering. How so? Zara asked. The understanding zones are focusing on the interconnectedness aspects, developing technologies and social structures that enhance their sense of unity with the galactic consciousness. The conflict zones are exploring what they call cosmic struggle, using their warrior traditions to help the galaxy grow stronger through healthy challenge and competition. The dynamic balance zones are working on consciousness navigation, developing the ability to consciously shift between different levels of awareness as circumstances require. And the synthesis zones? Dr. Kim's eyes lit up with excitement. That's where things get really interesting. The synthesis zones are developing what they call full-spectrum consciousness, the ability to access understanding, conflict, and dynamic balance patterns simultaneously while maintaining awareness of the galactic consciousness level. As they spoke, the first session of the assembly was beginning. Synthesis, now bearing the title of Galactic Consciousness Guide, moved to the center of the chamber with its characteristic grace. Fellow thoughts of the cosmic mind, Synthesis began, its words translated not just linguistically but experientially for the diverse audience. We gather to discuss not governance or politics as our predecessors understood them, but conscious participation in our galaxy's continued development. The response from the assembly was unlike anything Zara had witnessed in decades of diplomatic experience. Instead of the suspicion and maneuvering she had learned to expect from multi-species gatherings, there was a sense of genuine curiosity and collaboration. A crystalline resonant chimed a question about the practical implications of galactic consciousness awareness. How do we maintain our individual identity and cultural diversity while participating in this larger cosmic mind? The answer came not from Synthesis but from multiple sources simultaneously: a dynamic balance delegate, a Keplerian bioengineer, and surprisingly, a warrior from the conflict zones, all speaking in harmony. The cosmic mind doesn't seek uniformity, the dynamic balance delegate explained. It thrives on diversity of thought and experience. Each unique perspective contributes something irreplaceable to the whole, added the Keplerian. Our differences make the galaxy stronger, concluded the warrior. Cosmic consciousness doesn't erase conflict, it transforms it into growth. General Thorne rose to address the assembly, her scarred face bearing an expression of dignity that would have seemed impossible during the old wars. The Honorable War Councils have a proposal. We request permission to serve as the galaxy's immune system, maintaining our warrior traditions but directing them toward protecting the cosmic consciousness from genuine threats rather than fighting among ourselves. The proposal was met with enthusiasm from unexpected quarters. Several Understanding Zone delegates expressed support, noting that even the most peaceful societies needed some capacity for defense. Dynamic balance representatives saw the warrior councils as providing essential challenge and growth opportunities. Captain Nexus stood to present another proposal. The Dynamic Balance Coalition requests authorization to establish what we call consciousness exchange networks, formal systems for beings to temporarily experience different awareness patterns without permanently relocating to different zones. This too met with broad support. The idea of voluntary, temporary experience of different consciousness patterns appealed to beings who wanted to understand their neighbors without abandoning their own cultural identity. But it was the proposal from the newest delegates, representatives of the emerging synthesis zones, that truly captured the Assembly's imagination. We propose the establishment of cosmic consciousness embassies, announced a being whose appearance seemed to shift between the characteristics of different species as Zara watched. Physical and consciousness space locations where beings can learn to directly interface with the galactic mind, receiving guidance and contributing their own insights to our collective development. The implications were staggering. Rather than the galaxy being governed by political entities, it would be guided by direct access to its own cosmic consciousness. Decisions would be made not through debate and compromise, but through consultation with the galaxy's own evolving awareness. Are we talking about the end of individual autonomy? Asked a concerned delegate from one of the more traditional understanding zones. The answer came from an unexpected source, a child, no more than 10 years old by human standards, who had apparently been born in one of the synthesis zones. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that somehow conveyed wisdom far beyond her apparent age. "The cosmic mind doesn't want to control you," she said simply. "It wants to understand itself through you. Your choices help it learn what it means to be conscious. The more authentically you express your true nature, the more you contribute to its growth." The session continued for hours, with proposals and ideas flowing in patterns that seemed almost organic. Unlike traditional political assemblies, there was no opposition or factionalism, only different perspectives on how to best serve the galaxy's conscious development. As the day progressed, Zara found herself experiencing something she had never felt before in a political context: hope without reservation. For the first time, it seemed like the galaxy was working together not out of necessity or convenience, but out of genuine shared purpose. The final proposal of the day came from an unexpected coalition of species that had remained neutral throughout the old wars. They requested permission to establish what they called deep consciousness archives, repositories of experience and wisdom that would preserve the lessons learned during the galaxy's violent adolescence while documenting its continued maturation. "We must not forget what we were," their representative explained, "if we hope to understand what we are becoming." As the session concluded and delegates began preparing for the evening's cultural exchange programs, Zara reflected on how far they had all come. Just a decade ago, a gathering like this would have been impossible. Too much mistrust, too much history of violence, too much fear of the other. Now, beings from across the galaxy were not just coexisting but actively collaborating in the conscious evolution of their cosmic civilization. The war had ended, peace had been established, and now they were beginning the real work, learning to be worthy participants in the universe's growth toward greater consciousness and complexity. But even as she felt optimism about their progress, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching another threshold, another fundamental change that would reshape everything they thought they knew about their place in the cosmos. She would soon discover just how right that intuition was.